Previously, in my Earthbound 64 Iceberg video, I mentioned the theory of the time skip that occurs in the GBA version of Mother 3 being changed from what it originally was planned to be in the N64 version of the game, that being 10 years originally rather than 3. In this video, I hope I can better explain that point, because to me, it's been an interesting theory that just lines up with everything in the game really well. Firstly, the most important piece of evidence of the time skip being 10 years is the interview with Benimaru Ito that I mentioned in the Iceberg video. Right there, he says the game was going to take place over 10 years. For a pretty long time, people speculated that this meant that originally, Mother 3 was going to have some sort of segment that took place years before the game takes place. I don't think that would have been the case, though. I mean, my justification for that is, there's no evidence of that, not in any N64 nor GBA Mother 3 content that we have. The only thing that can maybe be argued towards this point is that in the files to the GBA version, there are sprites of what appear to be a younger Kumatora. However, we don't even know if it's supposed to be Kumatora. These sprites aren't even found in Kumatora's sprite bank, with the rest of her sprites in the game. Plus, this is still GBA content. We don't know if at any point in the GBA version's development, if they were still planning on having the time skip be the same way as I suspect it was in the N64 version. Anyways. Firstly, I'm going to be explaining a bunch of points about stuff from the final game that I feel like would make more sense if they took place over 10 years rather than only 3 years. Firstly, Wes. In the final version of Mother 3, Wes accompanies Duster and Kumatora in parts of Chapter 2 and 3. However, by the time the time skip has gone by, he doesn't do anything. It's pretty clear that he wants to go out and find Duster after he hears the lead about him supposedly still being around, but he doesn't go. The reason in the GBA version that he doesn't go out and look is that Fasad's cronies are on the lookout for me, so I can't go anywhere or do anything. Kinda a lame excuse in my opinion. I think that this point points towards the 10-year time skip because, consider this, Wes is an old man already at the start of the game, but he can defend himself, as evidenced by the fact that, well, he was a playable character. 10 years going by would logically do a lot more to affect the physical capabilities of an already elderly man, a lot more than only 3 years. What I feel like the original dialogue would have been maybe something along the lines of, I would go out and find him myself, but I've aged a lot in the time I last saw Duster. I can't do what I once was able to, sadly. In my opinion, I just feel like that'd be a more reasonable reason for Wes to not go out himself, rather than the reason he gives in the GBA version. Next is Flint. I briefly mentioned this in the Iceberg video too, but I think that Flint's balding was supposed to be a visual metaphor for the stress he underwent during the game. Firstly, we know that the baldness thing was going to be relevant in some way to the story, because of the Mother 3 Times article that talks about what's under Flint's hat. My theory is that he had begun receding at the start of the game, before anything happened, but as the years went by and the stress of losing his beloved wife, and just wanting to see his missing son again, he lost it faster, and 10 years later, it was all gone. Compare this to the GBA version of the game, where his baldness really has no significance. Really, when you find out about it, it seems that it was something that was really forced in at the last minute. I mean, it's this completely tonally different thing to everything else going on at that point in the game. It's literally hidden in the game by the fact that you have to talk to Flint a bunch of times for him to mention it. I theorize that this baldness thing would have been revealed during the lighter part of the game to show the toll the past 10 years had taken on him. I don't think originally it was planned to have been shown during the final hour of the game where everything else is tonally serious. Now, you may be thinking, well, I think you're looking way too much into this. Flint being bald was just a dumb gag about the dad character being bald. It didn't have a deeper meaning. I think that's fair enough, but I do believe I have justification for thinking the way I do and theorizing about this sort of thing. Consider how for Earthbound 64, we know that they were putting a lot of polish and attention to detail into the game. Seemingly things like this were minute, but it was all for world building to make the game's world feel more real. The best example I can think of this point is the idea about having the NPC leave out some clothes to dry and the next day come out with clean clothes on. I feel like a detail like Flint having a visual metaphor of everything he'd lost over the past 10 years would have played into this attention to detail point even more. Another thing quickly to note is that the post-time skip design of Flint also featured his trench coat being tattered, which I feel like further supports my theory. Things just weren't the same they were 10 years ago. Even Flint's coat didn't come out unscathed. Now, consider the sheer amount of changes that occur in Tazmily in Mother 3. Comparing how the town was at the start of the game compared to post-time skip, while it's definitely possible for all this stuff to have changed over only 3 years, wouldn't it make more sense if it was over 10 years instead? If that's not convincing enough, consider New Pork City. Think logically, something as huge as that being built seems just a little bit more far-fetched if it was built in only 3 years rather than 10. I know it may be considered a little silly to try and apply realistic logic for a video game, but for something like Mother 3, despite it being a fantasy game, it really does have a lot of aspects that are brutally realistic to help build a sense of making the world seem really real. So I believe that certain aspects like the time frame it would have taken to build an entire huge city would have made just a bit more sense logically originally. Just the sheer corruption of Tazmily itself would just make more sense over 10 years rather than 3. Having so many things change, like characters' mindsets and personalities, change so drastically would just be more realistic if the time frame it occurred over was longer. Now, this point is pretty important for this theory, in my opinion. Again, as I already mentioned in the Iceberg video, a lot of the characters in Earthbound 64 were going to have canon ages, and we know the ages of a few of those characters. Firstly, Boney. Boney was only 1 in human years, pre-time skip, so him being 11 would make sense in terms of the lifespan of a dog. But that piece of info isn't even as important as the twins' ages. Lucas and Klaus at the start of the game were 7. For this 10-year time skip, that would mean by the end of the game, they would be 17. Now, looking at what we know as Lucas's post-time skip model, in my opinion, he looks like he'd be 17. I can see why some people might disagree, but I just can't imagine that this design right here is supposed to be him at only 10 years old if there was only a 3-year time skip. We don't know exactly how old Kumatora was supposed to be, and the few screenshots we have of her are unfortunately not great quality, but it seems that her design changed quite a lot during the time skip too. So I feel like it could definitely be that this is Kumatora here originally, and this is Kumatora 10 years later. Now that I've covered all the circumstantial evidence, I want to mention, how was the time skip going to be originally handled? It's possible that, unlike the GBA version, that it could have been a gradual thing rather than just the, for a lack of a better way to describe it, the jump cut that the final version has. Benimaru Ito does mention that the game's passage of time was going to be an important theme. However, if they were going to have a gradual passage of time rather than a time skip, then that'd require a lot more unique assets, like in-between character models to show them progressively aging, so sadly, we can only speculate on that point. And one more thing, one more question. Would the game have been better if it had a 10-year time skip? In my opinion, if it was handled well, then yes, I think it would have helped in making the world feel more real. As in, having the change going on feel more realistic due to the gradualness of it being more apparent than what we can observe in the GBA version. And that's the original time skip theory. What do you all think? Are there any points that I've missed that you feel that points towards or against my theory? Please leave a comment if there is. Thank you so much for watching this video and for all the support. I have another Mother 3 video I want to make soon, so please look forward to that. In the meantime, my friends and I have launched a new Earthbound 64 Discord. Link is in the description. Thank you everyone, and I'll see you all again next time.